Women were cut loose with no means of support. Some really amazing stories about many of them died of hunger, the wives of priests. Some were suicides. Some turned into streetwalkers. And one of the really bizarre twists is that priests are called fathers. Who are they kidding? And in those years when the church was taking its power, and by the way, the number one landowner on the planet is the Roman Catholic Church. They have continued to accumulate massive wealth beyond description. So it was about power, and it was about property. So you've got this ugly scenario. There's the scandal of an aberrant, unbiblical, bizarre, pagan theology of the priesthood and the Mass. There's the scandal of the power and the grasping materialism of a satanic religious system that wants to engulf the earth. The Oxford Encyclopedia of the Reformation, Hans Hildebrand, editor, Oxford University Press, 1996. Those priests who were not married often lived in long-term relationships of concubinage, receiving special dispensations from their clerical supervisors to have their children legitimated. This practice began to change in the 12th century when at the Lateran councils, the church declared all clerical marriages invalid and prohibited clerical concubinage. So you could have a sex mistress for a while, and then they prohibited it. Many lesser clergy responded by rioting and demonstrating, but gradually celibacy became the norm, especially among the higher clergy, and women from honorable families no longer entered into relationships with priests, knowing that these could never be declared valid marriages. The prohibition of concubinage and other types of non-marital sexual activity among the clergy was hard to enforce, however, and by the 14th century, church officials simply advocated discretion. Just be discreet in your sexual misconduct. So what happened was this mandate tempted all kinds of immorality. Now remember, these people aren't converted, right? They can't be because they have an aberrant theology. So they have no power to restrain the flesh, right? The abodes of priests then, at this period of time and throughout the Middle Ages, became dens of corruption. It was common to see the worst and grossest kinds of sin carried on by priests. There were some who took a vow of chastity and made an effort to be pure, but a vow of celibacy was not a vow of chastity. And by the way, according to canon law, this is Roman church law, a vow of celibacy is broken if the priest marries, but it's not broken if he engages in sexual relationships. You don't break the vow of celibacy, says canon law, by sexual relationships. You have to marry to break the law of celibacy. So a celibate priesthood has nothing to say about the conduct. And further, and I'm reading from Dogma, pardon for sexual relations comes by confession to a fellow priest. That's all you have to do. You tell me yours, I'll tell you mine, right? That's all you have to do to get it expunged. You know, that's just an aside, but that whole confessional thing, you take men with normal sexual passions, you put them in a situation where that is restrained, and they have to restrain it without any divine power, which is impossible to do, driven by lust, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. That's what makes people tick. You put them like that, put them in monasteries, put them in seminaries, put them in enclaves with other men with the same kind of pent-up sexual frustrations. And then all day, every day, stick them in a confessional booth in anonymity where they sit and listen to everybody parade all their iniquities by. And you tell me that's a healthy environment? and that an unconverted man is going to sit in that environment and think holy thoughts, that's a compounding of the curse. It produces a level of hypocrisy that's staggering. By the way, you get absolution from sexual sin by confession to a fellow priest. Absolution for any priest who marries, you only get one way: from the Pope. From the Pope. You got to go all the way to the Pope to get absolution. And then it comes with severe penalty. Why? Because they care more about a priest who marries and the impact that will have on the power of the system than they do about a priest who commits sexual sin. Marriage is far worse to them than sexual sin because it threatens the church's power and property. And yet, isn't it bizarre that the Roman Catholic Church holds that marriage is a sacrament of matrimony. And yet it's a sacrament of matrimony that the most holy, quote, people, priests and nuns, are denied. And by the way, the Council of Trent pronounced anathema against all who teach that the marriage state is preferable to celibacy. So they damned anybody who thinks that marriage is preferable. You know, Jesus even said, not all men can bear that. Paul said it's better to marry than to burn. Let me tell you, that's true even for non-priest single people who prolong their singleness. You know, just give you a little advice. Find somebody. Don't wait for the Messiah. Just find somebody. String yourself out and compound your temptation. In the eyes of the priesthood, there is an inherent uncleanness in marriage. And it's a hangover from that sort of Manichaean, Gnostic idea of the evil of the flesh. There's an uncleanness in romantic desire. There's an uncleanness in normal love. There's something shameful in that. And that the desire for procreation is somehow the enemy of spiritual devotion. You know, my heart goes out to priests. They are literally, I think they are literally, in many cases, sexual time bombs. It's only a question of when it's going to go. That group of people in themselves have such a warped view of marriage because they're so fixated on the sexual aspect of it. They think marriage is all about sex and procreating little Catholics. And that's all it is. I was fascinated to read in Lorraine Bettner's book on Roman Catholicism this, quote, "The largest collection of books in the world on the subject of sex is in the Vatican Library." Who checks them out? What are they in there doing, some scholastic work? These poor people. This is a horrific sentence. Better they should go to prison and have some time limit when they're going to get out, can live a normal life. You know, the inmates, I call them inmates, of monasteries are unmarried men. It's just bizarre and abnormal. They say in the United States now, I read today a statistic, 50% of them are homosexual when they get there. The rest have no chance. These people are predators. Convents, too, promote an abnormal type of life, doing terrible things to these women who are there, who many are good-intentioned, as some priests are. But to deny someone normal family life, to deny someone normal relationships, is a cruel, cruel thing for the sake of the power of the system. You know, the thing that's so sad about a priest is he's absolutely a blip on the screen. He has no past because when he came into the priesthood or when she came into the convent, they gave up all their possessions and all their relationships. They quote to them that if a man is not willing to leave father and mother and hate father and mother for my sake, he's not worthy to be my disciple. And so there is a strong urge to hate everything that your parents stand for. So you cut yourself off from the past. You have no present. because you share life with nobody, and for sure you have no future. Sad. And these kinds of unnecessary restrictions are no help to personal sanctity, let me tell you. They are a hindrance, a severe hindrance to it. Priests are broken, shattered, tragic, sad, disconnected people. No past, no present, no future. They belittle the sanctity of the marriage relationship. They are denied normal relationships, the friendship of marriage. They're victims of a terrible system with no biblical basis whatsoever. It is a soul-destroying process that leaves them in a situation of rampant temptation, exposure to the worst. And the only way to fulfill these drives is sinfully. And they do not have the restraint of a transformed or sanctified life. Emmett McLaughlin writes, the life of a priest, he's an ex-priest, writes, is an extremely lonely one. He lives in a large rectory. He is still lonely. Other priests are not interested in him or in his doubts and scruples. If he is the only priest in a solitary parish or desert mission, he is still more alone. As his years slip by and the memories of seminary and its rigidity fade away, the realization may dawn that his life is not supernatural, but a complete mental and spiritual and physical frustration. He sees in his parish and his community the normal life from which he has been cut off. He sees the spontaneous childhood which he was denied. He sees the innocent, normal companionship of adolescence which for him never existed. He performs the rites of matrimony as starry-eyed young men and women pledge to each other the most natural rights and pleasures. He stands alone and lonely at the altar as they turn from him and confidently, recklessly, happily step into their future home, family, work, and troubles and the successes of a normal life. More than anything else, he seeks companionship, the companionship of normal people, not frustrated, disillusioned victims like himself. He wants the company of men and women, young and old, through whom he may at least vicariously take part in a relationship with others that he has been denied and for which at least subconsciously the depth of his nature craves. No priest who has heard priest's confessions and has any respect for the truth will deny that sexual affairs are extremely common among the clergy. The principal concern of the hierarchy is that the priests keep such cases quiet. That's the sad reality. That's the scandal. And in that environment, all kinds of sin abounds. In many countries of the world, it is predominantly heterosexual sin. Priests have relationships with women in the parish, prostitutes, or even nuns. But in this modern time, and certainly back 50 years we're finding out now, as homosexuality has always been a part of this life, we're finding now that it's even more and more a part of it. In fact, I read an interesting article, it was an editorial op-ed piece in, I think it was the LA Times, in which a man was writing and saying, the whole problem with this, the whole problem is the church's problem. The church has forced this. The church has forced this to happen, this abuse of boys, this pedophilia, because the church says homosexuality is a sin. This is the bizarre character of this op-ed piece. It says homosexuality is a sin, and therefore, for homosexuals who are Roman Catholics to be accepted by the church, the only thing they could do was become priests. And so the church, by identifying homosexuality as a sin, forced homosexuals who wanted to be good Catholics into the priesthood. So it's easy to see why this happens in this terrible, terrible system. And yet, they can't change it. Can't change it because there's an inerrancy and an infallibility in the church. And one of the elements of that is that if you're a priest, you're a priest. And it can't be reverted or rescinded. And that as long as you don't get married, all you have to do is confess to another priest. And that perpetuates the power of the system. That's why you see the cardinals all go over to Italy and come back, and what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. Because nothing can happen. The Pope, what did he say? Nothing. There's nothing to say. one of the things that it's just kind of